for tuning into CCN. I'm your host, Ryan Keelan. We have breaking news. It is September 5th, 1972. This is the second week of the Olympic Games in Munich, West Germany. This just in, at 5 o'clock this morning, a group of armed Arabs raided the sleeping quarters of Israeli athletes at the Munich Olympic Games. The group calls themselves Black September and are demanding the release of 234 Palestinian prisoners in Israel jails. We are unsure of the specifics as of right now, but we will be hearing from Erica McSweeney, who is in Munich.
Thank you, Ryan. We are currently outside the Israeli building of the Olympic Village. Early this morning, 8 Palestinians snuck into the village. There are 20 athletes and 6 officials being held hostage. We are currently hearing that 2 Israelis have been killed thus far. However, we have not been able to confirm that. The group has demanded that Israel release 234 Palestinian prisoners and 2 German terrorists, and they have set a 12 o'clock noon deadline. Negotiations are underway between German and the terrorists.
We are hearing that there has been 2 casualties. Israeli wrestling coach Moshe Weinberg and Israeli weightlifter Yosef Romano were shot and killed by the Palestinians when they broke into the building. We will switch over to Erica, who is in the Olympic Village.
This morning, the Palestinians immediately killed Israeli wrestling coach Moshe Weinberg. The Palestinians then allowed an ambulance to attend to one of the wounded Israeli officials. When shooting broke out between the German police and the Palestinians, the ambulance was forced back and the official died. The Palestinians have demanded to be flown out of Germany once their demands are met.
It is past the deadline set by the Palestinians, so let's check back in with our correspondent in the Olympic Village.
It is now past the deadline set by the Palestinians. We can see one of the commanders right now. Looks like he is keeping watch. Report that the group has explosives inside the building. However, I'm not concerned with them being able to exit, given the amount of security that the Germany has put forth. There are police officers everywhere.
It is now a couple hours past the deadline set by the Arab terrorist. We are hearing of developing plans from the German police. Let's check in with Erica, who is currently outside the village.
It is now 4:30 p.m. here in Munich, and the West German police have entered the Olympic Village. They are heavily armed, and I presume that it is an attempt at a rescue. Let's watch. The police have now retreated as the Palestinians reportedly threatened to kill more of the hostages. We have just heard that the mayor of the Olympic Village, Walter Trojer, was allowed into the building to speak with the hostages. An Israeli coach told Trojer that the Palestinians requested to be flown into an Arab country as long as their safety is guaranteed. Erica McSweeney for CCN.
We can now confirm that it's 6 p.m. Munich time. The Palestinians demanded a means to travel to Cairo. There will be 2 helicopters transporting the attackers and hostages to a NATO airbase. As we wait, we'll hear from Julia Harthammer, who sits right next to me, who specializes in Palestinian extremism. Julia, what can you tell us about Black September, and where did the group come from?
Hello, Ryan. So Black September is a militant extremist organization that is a faction of the larger Palestinian Liberation Organization. The PLO is a direct response to the Jewish state of Israel, which was established in 1949. There have been over 700,000 Palestinian refugees forced into camps in neighboring countries. Many Palestinians had the expectation that Arab nations would come to their defense. However, this never occurred. While most Arab states acknowledged Israel as an illegitimate occupation of Palestinian territory, there was a little desire to become involved in an international conflict with Israel. There was a realization among many Palestinians that they would have to rely on themselves to fight this conflict, thus the creation of multiple militant Palestinian organizations, including the PLO and Black September. The ultimate goal of these organizations is to undermine the state of Israel and ultimately lead to its destruction.
So Julia, why do you think these terrorists targeted Israeli athletes at the Munich Olympics specifically?
I think there are multiple reasons why the attacks occurred at the Munich Olympics. First, of course, there was a lot of emphasis on the Israeli athletes coming to Germany. The last Olympics in Germany occurred in 1936, as Hitler was becoming more and more powerful. These games were meant to be seen as a redemption for Germany. Another reason I speculate the Olympics were chosen is because of the amount of media focus. The entire world was already watching, creating the perfect stage to gain the attention Black September wanted. There has been an unprecedented amount of coverage of these attacks in the past week. It is unlike anything the world has ever seen before.
Yay. Julia, speaking of the amount of media coverage these attacks are getting, is it ultimately going to help or hurt the victims of these attacks?
Honestly, I think that the mass media is playing right into exactly what the terrorists want. Their goal is not to cause the most violence they possibly can, but instead to use a limited amount of violence to create leverage to get what they want, that being to release Arab prisoners being held in Israeli jails. These attacks are an embarrassment for Germany and a nightmare for Israel. The added pressure of a worldwide audience will likely cause them to give in to the demands of the terrorists faster than usual. They want this to be over as soon as possible. I think it is also important to understand that these terrorists also have access to the media and are likely using this constant coverage as insight to determine what to do next.
All right, Julia, I have one last question for you, and then I'll let you go. Do you agree with how German officials are proceeding, or do you think they could be going about this differently?
Well, obviously it's a very difficult situation. I don't believe I have the qualifications to know how this should be handled. However, I do think one of the main issues is that they never received proper training in order to know the right protocol to handle these attacks. They were clearly unprepared.
Hi, Taryn Barrett here. Since we last spoke to you, chaos has erupted at the airport. We're being told that the German government did not wish to fire or disable the airport in order to protect the hostages. Instead, they plan to station sharpshooters around the runway and in the planes. However, it has been announced that 6 German policemen disguised as flight crew in the 3rd helicopter have deserted the operation. At this point, there are not enough sharpshooters for the ambush to continue. We're hearing that 3 of the Black September terrorists were killed within the first wave of shots, and the others were able to hide out of range. One of the terrorists threw a grenade into a helicopter where 5 hostages were still tied up, instantly killing all of them. Another Black September terrorist fired his machine gun into another helicopter, killing the remaining hostages. It has been 20 hours since Black September has begun their attack, and the atmosphere has changed from anger to sorrow. We know that a German police official, 5 Palestinian terrorists, and 11 Israeli athletes lay dead. This absolutely devastating event will impact future public events for decades. The German government has also announced that 3 of the surviving terrorists are currently awaiting sentencing. While feelings of outrage are warranted, we must also take into account that lives have been lost and families will never be the same. It is truly a sad day.
To our knowledge, a German official will be holding a press conference shortly. The official is reportedly going to release information about the German security at the Olympic Village, address the tactical plan the Germans made, and why the German military was never unleashed to help police officers. I'm getting word that the press conference is beginning now, and we will switch over.
Thank you all for coming. It is with a heavy heart that I stand before you, as one of my former colleagues has passed, along with 11 Israeli athletes that were set to compete in this year's Olympic Games. I would like to offer additional insight into the German response to this attack, which of course exposed several failures. The first of which was the lack of funding. The Munich organizers had spent less than $2 million on security, and security personnel were unarmed, inconspicuous, and non-confrontational. A fine proposal if all goes as planned, but it clearly was not enough to protect the athletes. In the early morning on the day of the attack, 8 Palestinian terrorists were able to scale the fence surrounding the Olympic Village. They would go on to steal a set of keys to the Israeli residences on premises and were able to avoid detection as they were disguised as athletes. They easily entered the Israeli quarters undetected and were able to take 11 hostages at gunpoint. The terrorists would then go on to demand the release of over 200 Palestinian prisoners held in Israel. Germany launched a rescue attempt that was broadcast to the entire world, including the terrorists, and as you know, the attempt was unsuccessful. The second plan was to transport the terrorists and hostages to a nearby airstrip by helicopter and have armed police officers ready for an ambush. However, the plan would become a disaster on almost every front. The officers were placed poorly, had no radio communication amongst themselves or to commanders, no night vision capabilities, and no sharpshooting training. Furthermore, they had insufficient arms as they were equipped with assault rifles and no long long-range scopes as opposed to sniper rifles. They also underestimated the number of terrorists, as they thought there were 5 when in reality there were 8. I hope that Germany will learn from this catastrophe and implement real changes in protocol and training to prevent situations like this in the future. Thank you very much.
Everyone around the world is praying for the people of Germany, Israel, and the families who lost their loved ones. Israel plans to mourn and honor their late athletes by holding a funeral. Egypt and Israel decided to withdraw their teams from the remainder of the Olympics. The Olympics were postponed for 24 hours, and a memorial service was held for the athletes at the main Olympic Stadium. Also, International Olympic Committee President Avery Brundage ordered for the Games to continue, and this will hopefully show that the terrorists have not won. The United States has shown support to all that were affected during this horrific attack. We have heard that President Nixon has been calling for other nations to work together on counterterrorism initiatives that will help stop any other horrible attacks like this occur. On top of that, Congress has called for world isolation of any nation supporting terrorism. Controversial note to end on here at CCN, many believe that the Olympic Games were held in Germany to soften public perception of Germany. However, do these recent events make Germany look worse? Will people hold Germany responsible for the lack of defense? We will let you decide. That ends our coverage for today. We'd like to thank you all for tuning in. Good night and God bless.